Okay, it's Erev Shabbos in Jerusalem. Yesterday we were talking about the way in which the narrative over which God has authority can intersect with our own. I'm speaking, like I said yesterday, like a Miltonist. God is the author of all things, and yet men and women are authors to themselves. And there's this sense which there are two narratives, and the belief in free will, the belief in agency, and not just blind obedience, depends upon actually being able to take that personal narrative and to find some way of integrating that divine narrative. And by that I just mean history. What happens on a day-to-day level? How do I narrate what happens? How do I narrate my own life? And this is really what Pesach, in some sense, is all about. We have, which is an exciting thing for a literary critic, we have a mitzvah min haTorah. We have a mitzvah from God, a divine command to tell a story. And that story is the story of the of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the exit from Egypt. Now, the Haggadah, I think, is the most printed and commented on Jewish book in history. And it's a complex work, even in its simplicity. But I think the key is for us, especially during this time, the key is for us during this time to embrace that simplicity. Sometimes we get carried away by either the guests or the show-offs of wisdom or the show-offs of certain kinds of family relations. All this is great, people learning Torah and saying the things that they learned in yeshiva, or people sharing the storytelling around the table. I'm thinking of a very big table. I'm thinking of my Uncle Morty's house when I was 8 or 9 years old, and there were 30 or 40 people, and I just felt lost in all of that. Now I think we can focus on really the story. And telling a story has different components, and the Haggadah really deals with those components. The first thing is, and Maimonides, he comments about this. He says on the night of the Seder, when you're saying over the story of Yetziat Mitzrayim, the common expression from the Talmud is, or from rabbinic sources is, you should see yourself as if you yourself left from Egypt. The way the Rambam expresses it, the way Maimonides expresses it, is you should present yourself. You should show yourself. Move over performative theory, move over Judith Butler. On Leil Seder, Rambam is saying you have to not only see yourself, but you are performing that for others. And I think that the Rambam's version is very much in tune with what Pesach is all about. It may be about all those other things that I described before that make it a spectacle, but really it's about telling a story. And part of telling that story is being personally involved in that story, that you yourself see yourself as part of that story. And that's not only for you, it's for the people to whom you tell that story. The four sons are probably one of the better known parts of the Seder, things that nobody skips over. And of course, we can go into the details of the different sons and what their characteristics are. But what the Haggadah is emphasizing there is the parts of the story, or the components of storytelling. There's the person who tells the story, who sees himself in that light. But the person who tells the story also has to be able to relate to the people to whom they're telling the story. Again, this has to do with individual voice. We don't all tell the same story on during the night of the Seder. Even though the Haggadah says a person who embellishes Hari hu mashubach, the more you tell the story, the better. But the important thing about that storytelling is not just reciting something for its own sake. It's reaching out to people and reaching out to them where they are. Our children are different. All of our families are different. There's nothing necessarily normative about the story we tell. What's normative about the story we tell is that it's us who are telling it to our children. I remember when I was younger and I first started making Seders, I was very inspired by the Sfas Emes, who is a Hasidic commentator. And he said that on Leil Seder, this mystical and not usually my style, but on Leil Seder, on the night of the Seder, every parent has an inspiration to connect that, and then what is that inspiration, or what is that special power? To be able to connect with their child or their children. And I think this Sfas Emes is really kind of giving a pep talk to parents, to fathers and mothers, to uncles and aunts. The pep talk is you can do this. They are your children. The verse in the Torah, I just would want to conclude with this. And you should tell to your son on that day, Le'amor ba'avor zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeisi Mitzrayim. And you should tell your children, that on account of this, God took me out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt. And Rashi says, the medieval commentator says, ba'avor zeh, ba'avor sha'akim mitzvosav, kagon, Pesach, matzah, umurar, halalu. It's a strange comment. Rashi says, ba'avor zeh, for what reason did God take us out of Egypt? So that today, here and now, we could fulfill the mitzvot that God commanded because of Mitzrayim. She'akayem mitzvosav kegon Pesach matzah u'moror, that I, God speaking, will establish the mitzvot of Pesach, matzah, u'moror. And Mitzrayim, it's not like we might think intuitively that on Leil Seder, we remember what happened in Egypt as something in the past. Rather, actually, ba'avor zeh, we left Mitzrayim so we could have this today. Pesach, matzah, umor, the central parts of the Seder that we mentioned. Why did we leave? We left not because of the privileging of the past and we remember it in the present. It's actually everything centers around now. God took us out of Egypt. Why? So we could sit around the table together and tell stories to our children. Telling stories, it's gone out of fashion. But for Jews, it's always been in fashion. And the reason we tell stories is because stories are the way we teach. And on Pesach, we remember that stories are important, and we also remember it's important to teach. In the meantime, Shabbat Shalom.